Welcome. You're listening to This Leader, the podcast. If you lead people and are seeking the transformational, high-impact secrets that will lead to greater joy and fulfillment in your work, will optimize your team performance, and will help you create a happy, highly productive workplace, then you are this leader and you're in the right place. I'm your host, Claire Laughlin, and each week my guests and I will explore the mindsets, techniques, and actionable strategies that will help you build the career, team, and organization of your dreams. Because I believe no one should have to suffer in a dysfunctional workplace. Let's get started. Hello there. Welcome back. Today, we are going to talk about change. You've probably heard the saying, change is the only constant, right? Are you tired of hearing that? I know I am, but you've got to admit, it feels so true. Just when things start to calm down, another new initiative gets introduced, or someone announces their retirement, or you inherit a team member from another department. Between the accelerating pace of technology, constantly fluctuating markets, budget and regulatory changes and personnel shifts, there's simply no end to change in our work lives. So let's cut to the chase. Whether you actively lead a team or not, you need to become intimately familiar with the nuance of change and develop the skills to navigate it yourself while leading others through it too. I mean, it has been said that every manager is a change leader, and I really want you to take that to heart. So today, we're going to dive into our feelings and reactions to change, because understanding this emotional aspect of change leadership is where it all starts. And I'd really love for you to be thinking specifically about changes that you've experienced recently. Consider changes at work that you initiated, and how did people respond to those? And think about changes that impacted you that you didn't have any say in. Think about changes that felt good, that you agreed with, that felt favorable, right? And those that didn't feel so good. We're going to explore all of this together. Because whether you formally lead a team or not, mastering these skills makes you invaluable in today's environment. So we're going to dive in and talk about the emotional journey of change. Understanding this is where effective change leadership begins. So not all change is created equal, and we know that. Think of change like weather patterns moving through your organization. Some people will be in sunshine while others are experiencing thunderstorms, all in response to the same change. So we're going to explore 3 key dimensions that determine someone's personal change forecast, so to speak. First, change we choose versus change that was imposed upon us. Because when we feel in control, we adapt much more readily. If you decide to reorganize your team or implement a new system, you'll face challenges differently than if your boss mandates it unexpectedly. Second, some change feels favorable while other change feels unfavorable. Can you see what's in it for you? Do the benefits outweigh the costs from your perspective? That's a really important dimension. Third, change we can anticipate versus change that catches us by surprise. Right? When we can see it coming, we have time to emotionally prepare. Here's why understanding these dimensions really matters. You're likely experiencing a completely different weather pattern with respect to any given change than your team members. You could think about this like a change bridge. This is a metaphor that's helpful to explain what's going on here. Executives or people early to the change start crossing the bridge months before anyone else even sees it on the horizon. They're in planning meetings, discussing potential changes, weighing options, and mentally adapting long before announcements happen. And then they're thinking, why should we worry people unnecessarily? Why create uncertainty when nothing has been confirmed? Which makes sense, but meanwhile, they're getting comfortable with what's coming. By the time they announce the change, they've already processed much of their emotional response, and they understand the necessity and they can see the potential benefits. But often they're shocked when their team reacts with resistance or fear to what seems obvious. What leaders must remember is that others are just starting their journey across the change bridge, while those who are announcing the change are already on the other side. One leader I worked with, I remember he said, I felt like I was telling everybody about this amazing new house we were moving into, and they were all upset about leaving the old one, right? So it's sort of like that. So I want you to remember these three essential guidelines when introducing change. First, introduce change earlier than feels comfortable, earlier than you think you have to, right? But frame it thoughtfully. Say something like, hey, I'm sharing this early because I value your input. And we don't have all the answers yet. We don't know exactly how this is going to go, but here's what we know so far. Okay. So frame it up carefully and share it early because that way people can start to adapt. Second, prepare people for impact by balancing honesty with hope. Okay. You could say, this transition is going to be challenging in some ways, and I expect we're going to hit roadblocks with X, Y, and Z, right? And I believe this positions us for greater success in the long run because of whatever, such and such. If you let people know that you have confidence in their ability to adapt, but you can acknowledge that it might be difficult, that's going to make this easier. Finally, address the emotional responses directly, right? As people are feeling things around change, talk about it. You could say, hey, it's normal to feel uncertain or concerned about these changes. I felt that way too when I first heard about this. Let's talk about those feelings. Bring them out into the open. That can be really, really powerful to help people prepare for change. Neuroscientist David Rock has studied how our brains react to change. He found that our brain, in its effort to protect us, is constantly scanning for threats. Thank you, brain. Thank you for that. He categorizes those threats with the acronym SCARF, S-C-A-R-F. S stands for status, and that is about our standing relative to others, okay? C stands for certainty, and that's our need to predict what's coming next. We love the illusion that we can predict what's going to happen next. A stands for autonomy, which is our desire to control our own circumstances, right? R stands for relatedness, which is our connection to people around us. And F stands for fairness, which is our sense of what's equitable for ourselves and others. So let's apply this to a really common scenario. Imagine your organization is implementing a new project management software, something simple. This seemingly simple change can trigger all 5 of these threat responses. So, for example, status. Let's say your Excel wizard worries that her expertise is suddenly devalued, right? And quick adopters of the new technology are going to gain new prominence. That might threaten someone's sense of status. Certainty. Everyone's going to wonder, can I learn this system quickly enough? Like, what if I fall behind? What is uncertain about this? How will this impact my job? It's a big one. Autonomy. People who created their own workflow systems and their own ways of doing things now have to follow prescribed processes. So they're going to lose some control over how they work. And that can be a challenge. Relatedness. Let's say you used to have in-person project team meetings, and now it's going to be virtual. And so that can threaten some team connectedness, some relatedness. And fairness. You know how it goes. Some departments are probably going to get more training or more attention or more resources as we roll this out. So, that can actually spark a person's threat of fairness for sure. But as a leader, when you recognize that these are natural responses and they are associated with almost any change and people will feel differently than you do, now you can address them directly. You can highlight how learning this system is going to build your valuable skills, right, to enhance a person's status. You can provide comprehensive training early, and that will help allay a person's concerns about uncertainty. You can allow some customization where possible, right, to give people back their autonomy. You can schedule face-to-face meetings, which is going to enhance relatedness. And you can really talk about how you're trying to give equal support to everyone. And that's going to help with that sense of fairness. So you can address all of these because they're probably all at play in some ways. Knowing and understanding this SCARF model has been really, really helpful for me because it helps me to see that, hey, what could be at risk for a person? And I can even adapt my communication accordingly. Let's explore one final framework, the emotional journey of change. When significant change occurs, people often experience these grief-like emotions that follow sort of an arc. And we can understand this arc using an acronym, SARAH, SARAH. So let me unpack this a little bit. S stands for shock, and that's the initial response that happens when change is announced. Like, imagine when a valued benefit has been cut or a beloved colleague leaves suddenly, right? We often feel that shock and we may go into denial in a sense like, what? No, are you sure? That kind of thing. So shock is your initial reaction. The first A stands for anger, which typically follows shock. And as we discussed in episode 8, we really need to feel that emotion of anger, but then dig a little deeper into the story behind it to determine if that story is going to really, really serve us. But anger is a natural emotion, okay? R stands for resistance. And you'll see this when people revert to previous behaviors or they subtly resist moving forward. They might ask a lot of questions, or, you might hear rumors like, hey, just wait it out, this will pass. Or your team might keep revisiting decisions that you've already finalized. Resistance takes many forms, and you will definitely notice this. The second A is for acceptance. We're going to eventually begin adapting to new realities and discussing how to make things work. So this is when we stop focusing so much on the pain and the problem and we start looking forward. And finally, there's H. H stands for hope. And this is when we see a new pathway forward, we start trying new things and we start implementing the change. Now, these stages aren't linear, my friends. People move between them, sometimes cycling back through earlier stages. Someone could start to feel acceptance on a Monday and then hear a rumor and revert back to anger or resistance on a Tuesday, So these are not linear, but understanding that people experience these feelings around change, it's really, really critical. So now I want to pause here for a moment and I want to ask you, now that we've gone through SCARF and SARAH, I really want you to think about some of the changes that you've experienced recently. Were you experiencing any of those threats that we talked about in the SCARF model? Was your status threatened or your certainty? Did your sense of autonomy maybe get sort of riled up there a little bit? Your sense of relatedness or fairness? What happened there? And what about those grief responses? What about that arc of grief? Were you able to see, especially in hindsight, that you experienced some shock or anger? Did you resist in any way? And how did you move toward acceptance and hope? Think about these things for yourselves and think about them when it comes to leading others. Think about your team and how they're reacting and look through these lenses to try to understand them at a deeper level. Let me pull these frameworks together with some practical takeaways that you can use immediately. First, recognize that your perception of change is just that. It is your perception. Your team members will experience the same change very differently based on many things, like, did they choose it? Does it seem favorable? Did they see it coming? Very, very important. Second, watch for those SCARF threat responses. When someone resists a change, ask yourself, could this be about their status or certainty or autonomy, their relatedness or the fairness? Pinpointing those specific threats lets you address them directly, and even better, helps you pre-plan for some of that resistance and build it into your powerful and reasonable, responsible communication plan. Third, identify where each person is in their SARAH journey, okay? Some might be in shock while others have reached acceptance. Don't expect everyone to progress at the same pace or in the same manner. Here's what effective change leadership really looks like in practice. 1, communicate early and often. Share the why behind the changes, not just the what. Create psychological safety for people to express their concerns without being labeled as difficult. Ask them for what could go wrong. Ask them for their feedback. 2, build in elements of choice. Maybe they can't control the change itself, but what can they control? Can they influence how it's implemented? This may address their need for autonomy. 3, acknowledge emotions directly. Simply by saying things like, I understand that this feels uncertain right now, and that's completely normal, validates their experience and helps them move forward. And finally, remember, your own reaction to change sets the tone. If you're stuck in resistance, your team is going to absorb and reflect that energy. So do your own emotional work, especially at first, so you can guide others effectively. Your ability to navigate change is perhaps one of the most valuable leadership skills you can develop. It's not about avoiding discomfort. It's about moving through all of it with awareness and intention and bringing your team along with you. That's it for today. If this episode helped you, please share it with another leader who might benefit, and visit my website for additional resources for you as a leader to support you on your leadership journey. Thanks so much for listening. And until next week, go lead the way. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about my services and for lots of free resources and additional tools to enrich your journey, visit my website and subscribe to my newsletter at clairelaughlin.com. If you have a question about leadership, teams, or organizational culture you'd like me to address on the podcast, please reach out to me at support@clairelaughlin.com and connect with me on social channels @Claire Laughlin Consulting. Until next time, lead the way.